How do you reimagine a game some consider design perfection? Well, I wouldn't know, but Capcom has yet again delivered a masterful Resident Evil remake, and maybe their best one to date. Resident Evil 4 Remake is a near-perfect recreation of one of the greatest video games ever made, and brings improvements to the already fantastic original in almost every way imaginable. While we have a review on the way going over the many positives and even the few negatives we have, know that this is probably the best game in not just the Resident Evil franchise, but of all remakes in general. Seeing as the game it was based on was the first majority action-oriented title in the series, Resident Evil 4 Remake has easily the best boss catalog of any of the 3 remakes so far. However, what to count and not count was a bit unclear, so we'd like to quickly go over what we decided on. In the original, there were 11 fights, and solely counting the bosses from the original, there were only 10 in this game, as U3 was removed. However, the Krauser cinematic from the first game was turned into a legitimate fight, which we counted, and we also felt like it was fair to include the twin El Gigante fight as their own unique boss as well. Before we dive in, thank you to our patrons for their constant support, and if you'd like to, check out both our Discord server and Patreon, linked in the description below. Resident Evil 4 Remake is a mind-blowing reimagining similar to the equally great Dead Space remake, only released months earlier. Both did an incredibly good job at adapting classic and seemingly untouchable titles into a more modern format. However, to focus in on just Resident Evil 4, how did this game's bosses compare to the original's legendary lineup? Let's get into it.
Medical technology has come a long ways in the Resident Evil universe. First, they discover a strain of weed that does what potheads in real life think it does, then first aid spray, and now an apparent medicinal use for chainsaws. Dr. Salvador has unfortunately lost all knowledge of whatever the chainsaw he kept in his medical practice was used for thanks to the plaga, or at the very least grown very sloppy in his application. After about a minute of juking out the villagers during their bingo party pre-gaming session, Dr. Salvador here shows up to up the ante. With him running around, shit gets serious, since the villagers somehow have the spatial awareness of a seasoned basketball player. Every goddamn alley I run into has 2 identical old men in newsboy caps with pitchforks waiting for me at the other side, and backing up isn't a great option once the chainsaw is running. None of the fights in this game are really bad in particular, but this guy's the butt monkey of the list because you can just avoid him for a while and run the shot clock until the old folks home opens up for bingo. It's also mildly annoying being swarmed by villagers every 2 seconds this early into the game given your low ammo stock, so instead of fighting you really are just best off running around doing nothing the whole time. While it's not jam-packed with edge-of-your-seat fun, Dr. Salvador is at least memorable. He also resembles my 9th grade Halloween costume, which I made fully ignorant of Resident Evil 4 at the time. It seems love of this character design truly spans time and culture.
Separate rankings are usually pretty straightforward, as the majority of the time experiences are shared. Like, the bed of chaos will always be the bed of chaos and nothing better. However, on occasion Alex and I just have different experiences with the same boss, and this usually leads to massive discrepancies in our rankings, and in turn a pretty convoluted final ranking that doesn't represent our shared opinion. Why is Chief Mendez the second to bottom boss on our list? Well, for one, because it's damn interesting seeing the best boss from the original drop to the bottom, but really because it was the easiest solution to our problem. I have him at number 3 though, so why should I pretend like I dislike him even though clearly I did not? Well, the answer is a rather simple one. I'll script, and then Alex will. For me, Chief Mendez was definitely worse than his original version, and immediately what stuck out to me was his off-screen transformation, which in the original was one of the most impactful moments throughout the entire game. Why this was a recurring theme in the remake, I'm not sure, but it definitely hurt Mendez's overpowering transition from human to mutant the most of any other case in my opinion. Moving on to the fight, the first phase is pretty good, and definitely gets points in how if you climb a ladder to the 2nd floor, Mendez has different attacks, his back is a lot more open to damage which makes stuns easier and reserves ammo, and the knife R2 QuickTime even has a separate and way cooler animation. Nonetheless, I feel like all of his attacks that aren't evadable are extremely hard to avoid, and this got really frustrating when you'd get continually grabbed even if you walked the intended side to run to. However, this phase isn't particularly challenging and gets followed up by his infamous, legless second evolution, which was by far the worst part of the fight. I don't think this phase is that bad, especially with a damage level 3 TMP, but the minimal space given, lack of attack variety, and ridiculous damage output on melee attacks hurt it for sure. I mean, seriously, you have like 4 square feet to run around. This second phase might as well have happened in a fucking postal box. The explosive barrels were a neat touch, but the wood planks feel sort of redundant. If you literally walk to a side while ADSing, you avoid them, but if you get caught on one of the 6-inch by 6-inch flanks of the arena, you're guaranteed to get hit. This modernized reimagining is just a downgrade from the far scarier, more complex, and challenging 2005 Village Chief. However, that's just my take. He's down here for a reason, which I'll leave for Alex to explain.
As Jack said, I don't think it's an outright bad fight, but I have my gripes. Namely, I don't know why they changed so much from the original fight. The first phase is fine, but he dies in like 5 shotgun blasts, so it barely matters. What really gets me is the second phase, which sees a massive downgrade. For starters, your maneuverability is completely forsaken due to the ring of fire they added to lock you out of half the arena. Who the fuck was playing the original and thought, do you know what would make this awesome fight even better? What if you could barely move the entire time and the boss was on a weirdly scripted back and forth AI pattern? Instead of the dread of having him scuttling around the rafters and attacking from any direction, now he just sits on the far wall and sends planks of wood at you, which can be really fucking annoying to dodge if you're not at the edge of the room when he starts throwing them. Once this phase begins, he goes back and forth in an extremely predictable pattern, which is both a massive blow to the atmosphere of the fight and the fun of being able to do things other than spam the sniper rifle at him from across the room. If I felt like doing that shit, I'd be hanging out in the merchant shooting gallery. I think all in all, it's a really disappointing juxtaposition with the original fight, which is insult to injury, but it's still tolerable for sure. I'm not a rabid meat rider of the original game, but I still think it's definitely worth pointing out areas where they bungled stuff for no clear reason. Literally just Dr. Salvador, but you have a more defined arena and more weapons at your disposal. Unless you really liked running around with your dick in your hand for the duration of an entire cable television advertising slot, this is just inarguably more entertaining the way I see it. It's less memorable due to being a repeat, I suppose, but the fun level here is a lot higher, which is what matters at the end of the day when we're comparing minor bosses.
Another classic fallen from grace. Del Lago, while not as good as the village chief in the original, one-ups his former superior by way of simply being mediocre. While the remake's gore was really good even if it wasn't the focus, Del Lago was one of the few segments ever in a Resident Evil game to actually have lackluster gore. The original fight had a massive spew of blood come out when you toss a spear at the creature, whereas in this game I barely could tell if I hit it or not. I did think some of the changes made were interesting, like the boat movement designed specifically for its chomp attacks. However, the fact that the dead in the water segment gets repeated multiple times in the remade Del Lago definitely hurt the tension, and I'll even go as far to say that a quick time or two would not have hurt this fight at all. It was one of the few QTEs in the original I felt was actually beneficial to the segment it was in. Del Lago is still good, just not as satisfying or mechanically intense as the original version.
El Gigante is one of the most straightforward bosses in a Resident Evil game ever. Fuck shooting eyeballs and gore blobs, El Gigante is just a big bumbling buffoon who you shoot a lot wherever you damn well please. He eventually does spout a plaga for you to attack, which is satisfying because you can one-shot it with a well-placed rifle shot and bring him down to his knees for further knife damage. If you save the wolf from the village chief's manor, he shows up to join the fray too, although he doesn't seem to do all that much. It's cool that he shows up at all, I was just happy to have the company. They removed the introductory Ganado massacre for some reason, as to why I couldn't even guess, but I do feel that this was overall an improvement on the original in terms of design, so I'll let it slide.
I'm not a huge fan of the first El Gigante fight Alex just went over, but man is this thing an upgrade on both that and its original version. The addition of Luis and the AI changes made to the Gigantes and their reactions to you turning the valve made this fight feel so much more immersive, and not just like two of the same copy-pasted creatures in a semi-interesting arena. As well, the somewhat scripted way it goes down was also a great design choice. To elaborate, I kept trying to sinkhole the normal Gigante to no avail. Every time I would, he'd run to the side and Leon would repeat the same dialogue over and over. This gave me a cue that the valve was intended for later. This first Gigante you're supposed to treat just like the other one you fought near the lake. Luis makes this a lot more enjoyable as he can make both trolls aggro him, allowing you to just wail on the unarmored Gigante free of charge. Once you take him down, Luis climbs the scaffolding, arms loaded with TNT. You then bait the Army Gigante towards him, wherein Luis straps a TNT to its back and you blow it up, staggering the giant and leaving his Plagas opened on his back. I happened to get lucky and stunned the thing barely in range of the trapdoor and ended it there, and man was that fucking awesome. This fight is great, and was a massive upgrade on its decent original version.
I'm an avid defender of Leon quips. I don't even find them corny half the time, I just genuinely find them funny. This fight, however, is sort of baffling. I don't even know what the fuck they're talking about. There's maybe 90 seconds worth of dialogue about some hypothetical script Salazar has that they both keep referencing that even I can't defend. I'm sure if you kept the fight running long enough, they'd still be talking like, "Surely you jest, Mr. Kennedy. We are not in the rising action anymore, but rather the climax. You'll die soon enough." And then Leon would say something like, "Yeah, and then I'll continue the Redfield bloodline. Are we done talking about things that'll never happen, old man?" That said, Salazar's voice is hilarious, so anything he says is going to be amusing to me, coherent or not. The intro cutscene where Leon just blasts him instantly was the funniest shit in the entire game to me, so props on that front. If only they kept the weird half-kid, half-old man look instead of going full manlet geezer. The fight itself I thought was solid, your main goal being to avoid the streams of black gunk he expels from his mouth. It's harder than it sounds, and I died quite a few times to his insta-kill attack before getting him down. All the while, Salazar talks a lot of shit the more you whittle down his health, including some friendly fire towards small people that he clearly didn't think through too hard. Unfortunately for him, some point-blank shotgun blasts and stab wounds are enough to shrivel him like a nutsack in a meat locker, leaving him as nothing more than a single segment on my script.
Choppy cinematic QTE turned Roadman knife off? Are you fucking kidding me? That's awesome. Krauser's cinematic was pretty great, but actually doing it instead of watching it made it that much better. Krauser's role in this game was also much more explained and upfront, as I'll get into later on in his main fight segment, but this initial confrontation was honestly a home run, and as good as it could have been, all things considered. It's a pretty simple back and forth, parry him, melee him, slash him, repeat, but there really are no other enemies in the game with Krauser's attack prowess, so this is also a one-of-a-kind sequence. Krauser in the Mines was maybe the most immersive or engaging fight in the game. I felt super into it from the onset and was really focused during the whole fight. The lighting, Luis's death, and the scene as a whole, on top of just the fight itself, makes this an exceptional teaser, and one of my sleeper favorites overall.
The remake did Verdugo a real solid. I've never actually fought him in the original like Jack did, so I have no personal frame of reference, but I've been assured that the changes are drastically positive. I, for one, thought it was really cool. A lot of Resident Evil's strongest moments are distinct segments that people can refer to that everyone can recognize by name. Except the catapult segment, which drives me a little bit crazy every time, although being real, it's not that bad. For me to truly go insane, it would take some bullshit like being forced to spend a gratuitous amount of time doing something inarguably pointless and unpleasant, like playing Kingdom Hearts. Verdugo stalks you through the cave, sprinting like the fat guy from Subway Surfers for a few seconds before getting bored and slinking back into the sewer tunnels despite being easily able to beat you in a sprinting contest. Clearly the left hand must have all the brains. Speaking of brains, if yours are particularly sharp, you'll notice the switches that dispense liquid nitrogen down from the ceiling tubes. I may or may not have given myself an inadvertent cold shower a couple times, but thankfully it doesn't insta-kill you. Once Verdugo is frozen, you can unload into him with magnum rounds, shattering him after you fire enough ammo to kill the final boss 5 times over. I actually did something just like this to a doll of Grover from Sesame Street once when I was a kid because I fucking hated Grover for some reason. This was in fact the beginning of a decade-spanning butterfly effect that would change my life radically in the coming years. Feel free to shut a piece of that one together. While he may not be as life-changing as the late Grover, Verdugo was memorable nonetheless and quite fun to boot.
Garador's being at the bottom of my ranking is a tale of two encounters. I absolutely loved the first Garador in the basement of the castle. I thought it was one of the scariest, most atmospheric, and best looking fights in a Resident Evil game. The arena design was fantastic, the moveset variety was noticeably improved over the original, and just overall it was extremely memorable from beginning to end, with the physical design of the Garador, stealth attacks, and the cutscenes specifically being the biggest standouts to me. However, the second twin Garador encounter near the back of the castle was fucking miserable. In the original, Garador's AI were a bit more primitive, and as such you could evade them fairly easily even with enemy padding. It was just a matter of positioning and awareness, whereas in this, it just felt unfinished. The Zealots respawn infinitely and almost immediately once you kill off a wave of them, not to mention I had literally dozens of times where a Garador would sprint towards me and get stuck on well, something, I guess. Maybe I need to open my third eye to see why this dude kept getting his claw trapped in mid-fucking air. Anyways, the bell was one of the best additions in the original, and while it is in the remake again, I feel it's not as impactful, as Gatadors will sometimes not break it when used, and other times they won't even go after the bell, they'll just run at you instead. Maybe it really is just a skill issue, which I think is unlikely, but Gatadors overall are still pretty good, with one of the best boss battles in the remake, as well as one of the worst.
Lord Sadler is rather unusual in relation to other cult leaders. If you take a look at all the greats side by side, Charles Manson, Jim Jones, Low Tier God, etc., they all have a handful of commonalities. Narcissism, good looks, and a way with words all come to mind. Sadler is a fuck-ugly stunt double for live-action Bowser with a one-track mind for Las Plagas like Shaggy and Scooby-Doo have for sandwiches. If you dangled one of them on a stick in front of him, that would be running on all fours with his tongue hanging out for a bite. His motivations are a tad confusing. I can't tell if he genuinely thinks he's in the right like Wesker does or sees the Plagas as some means to an end to manipulate people for the purpose of world domination. I can't speak for the original, but in the remake he hardly gets any screen time where he isn't just foaming at the mouth about his bugs. Somebody feel free to fill me in on this matter, I'm genuinely curious. As for the fight, it's pretty awesome. Shooting eyeballs is nothing new. In fact, it's practically the trademark of the entire series, but the way they pop is just so satisfying. Blasting them into gunk with a magnum that could blast clean through elephant hide is certainly one of life's finer pleasures. Even when beset by the endless hordes of Novistadors, the fight is never too bad, since they don't quite figure out that hovering near barrels of flammable chemicals during a gunfight is in fact a health risk. This, of course, is obviously not the final phase of the boss because he's still a recognizable being with limbs and a head. Resident Evil law dictates that he morph into a glob of muck and meat at some point or another, and the catalyst is shooting him a lot, I guess. He looks like a fetus, which of course prompted me to channel my inner DMC Dante and pull out a sniper rifle. This phase is kinda bitchy. He was juggling me on the ground like a kid with an action figure for a while, and I literally couldn't even stand up or input any commands for a good 20 seconds. He hits like a pussy though, so thankfully it's nothing that is likely to actually kill you. With a rocket launcher in hand, he goes down instantly, and Leon is free to inexplicably reject Ashley's thinly veiled attempt to accept his plagas, if you catch my drift. At least Chris has one less obstacle in his quest for Leon to fertilize his sister in the way.
What was once an unexplained, contextless, and somewhat underwhelming combat sequence in the original has evolved into easily the best boss in the Resident Evil Remake series so far. Resident Evil 4 was my first RE Remake experience where I played the original before the modern recreation. As such, my perspective on all of these fights was massively different than what I had for the bosses of the previous remakes. Jack Krauser's role in the original RE4 was genuinely befuddling. I had no fucking idea who he was, what he was doing, or why he was important, and he only showed up one previous time, at least majorly, before the final fight in Chapter 5-3, and also doesn't even die then. Ada actually kills him for real in the Separate Ways playthrough, which totally defeats the point of Leon killing him in the first place. If it's not obvious, the 2005 Krauser was pretty flawed, beginning with a lack of context given. However, seeing as the Resident Evil 4 remake was released after the Darkside Chronicles and not before like the original, this problem cleared itself, but the remake also helped his cause by giving him a number of minor scenes before really introducing him in the mines, and from then spreading out warning messages from the super soldier himself throughout the island to build up this moment. Even if the original had all that contextual help, just due to age and hardware/mechanical limitations, the fight just wasn't very good. If anything, a total fucking mess. Your progression is extremely unclear and you just sort of stumble around the massive ruins hoping to get some clue as to where you go until you reach the tall building that happens to be strapped with time bombs, and then Krauser transforms. The remake, due to mechanical advancements made, is generally the same in sequence, but just better. It starts with Krauser sniping at you from a perch. You can fire back at him to get more time to advance, or just time your movements and crouch behind pillars and other variously conveniently placed structures to move on. If you do enough damage to him, Krauser will jump down and get into a knife fight with you, and he's a lot more aggressive in this than he was in the mines, and has a bunch of new additions to his moveset, like a flashbang and multiple escape quick times. Following this, you'll walk through a Scooby-Doo level booby-trapped environment. The layout was actually pretty smart and even caught me lacking once or twice. After this, it's a straightaway full of items there with the intention of getting you hit. The bulletproof vest carried me so fucking hard in this game, and this is the best example of its usefulness along with Salazar. You can get hit and take 0 actual health, which is a miracle because without it, I got screwed up the ass. The second knife fight is pretty much like the rest, but with the addition of proximity mines laid around the arena that should have probably killed me, but whatever, I guess. And then, the transformation. And holy shit was this part nailed. Not only because of how cinematic it was, but also because of the dark alleyway that follows. This horror-esque segment that leads into the final showdown wasn't super long or particularly incredible, but it just added a lot of tension and I thought it was great. Leading into the last sequence, which was in my opinion the most improved on moment from the original. The parrying mechanic allowed for so much innovation in combat, especially with Krauser. Once again in the original, this last segment was cheesable in literally 30 seconds, whereas now he's a lot more dangerous and requires precision. I still found the best strategy was to nail his legs with a TMP and be alert for his parryable swipes, but it was just a joy. And the multiple levels within the arena, as per almost all bosses in this game, was another great touch. Krauser was one of those bosses that you fought and immediately knew it would be the best. Not only because of the massively improved gameplay, but the importance of the moment overall for Leon as a character makes this not just the best boss in the Resident Evil 4 remake, but one of the best in the Resident Evil series. Thank you so much for watching and we hope you enjoyed. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't, and otherwise stay tuned for more weekly uploads, some of which will again be on the subject of the Resident Evil 4 remake. That's all for now. Deuces.